I interviewed Bill Harlan this past spring after he announced he was formally handing over the operations of his company to his son, Will. And in a career covering over 40 years in Napa Valley, Bill, of course, has developed his namesake winery and the Meadowood Resort, arguably two of the most prominent developments in the valley. And there's more, of course, the Napa Valley Reserve, Promontory, Bond. So while maybe the transition itself wasn't a surprise, change is inevitable, it was big news. Many family-owned wineries in Napa and around the world have had trouble transitioning from one generation to the next, yet Bill's move has seemed seamless and effortless, almost as if it was all going according to plan. That's impressive, not just because of the properties at stake, but I would argue that while shifting from any generation to the next in a family business is difficult, from generation 1 to generation 2 might be the most difficult. That's where you build the first link in the chain, everything from economics to marketing to planting to just the guiding philosophy gets set up in the beginning. It all requires constant attention to the future, and it's all wrapped up in that energy of family. The first question I asked Bill in that interview was, how did it feel to spend 40 years building all this up and then getting ready to turn it over right smack in the middle of a pandemic? And I was expecting a note of caution or a little worry about the future or concern, but instead he started his answer after a pause with a very sanguine, well, let's look back 100 years. And from there he went on to discuss his 200-year plan, one that looks backwards and forwards. His wine bug began with a visit to the just-opened Mondavi Winery in 1966, and it's bloomed ever since with his intensive wine trips abroad. He has immersed himself in the subject matter that has become his life's work, and it would have been easy to get lost in all that work. But somehow he managed to raise a family and prepare his company for the next generation. Today, his daughter Amanda has a role in the family business, and he's here today to introduce his son Will and talk about that 200-year plan and more. Now, when we put together the agenda for this year's program, one of the first things Marvin said was, we got to have Bill Harlan, we got to have him talk about the transition, we got to have him talk about the 200-year plan. And I said, Marvin, that's a 15-minute time slot, which means he's got to get through 13 years and 4 months in every single minute. How is that possible? And of course, Marvin, without hesitation, said, keep your introduction short. Please welcome our 2015 Distinguished Service Award recipient, the founder and chairman of Domaine H. William Harlan, Bill Harlan, along with its new managing director, Will Harlan.
Before I got up here today, I thought a 200-year plan and making it from the first generation to the second generation is a big deal. But after listening to Piero Antonori, I think I'm going to make it from the first generation to the second. Now, Will has to figure out how to make it from the second to the 25th or 26th. Well, being up here today and really listening to some of the people who came before and listening to Piero is very humbling, but it's also, I feel very fortunate that we've been able to, this has been a dream for me for almost my whole life, and it feels wonderful to be here, quite frankly. It's exciting for me to be here with you all at a time like this, which is really the transition of our family wine-growing domain. I'd like to start by giving a little vision of Harlan Estate, which from the beginning was the dream was to produce wines that one day might be welcomed at the table of the fine wines of the world. Our 200-year plan is a story of place and people and culture. The common thread that runs through our story is that we view wine growing as the art of man and nature. My job as founder has been to establish a foundation for the future generations to be able to build from. We had to start by capturing the right land. Throughout history, Napa Valley has been known as a place that produces very good, fine red wines. And the Oakville benchlands, the Rutherford Oakville benchlands, have been known for Cabernet Sauvignon. So I felt if we could be as close to that area as possible, it would be a good start for us. So we chose to be in the western hills of Oakville, with the eastern slopes overlooking this Oakville range. Once we had the land, we had to bring together a team that not only could get us started on this first generation, but also have the continuity to take us into the second generation. We started in the early mid-'80s with Bob Levy became our first director of wine growing. Shortly thereafter, Don Weaver, who is with us today, was director in charge of building relationships, both at home and around the world. And I think many of you here today know Don Weaver. He's now been with us for 35 years, and I feel very fortunate to be able to have worked with Don through all these years. The third person that joined us about that same time was Lily Lee. She's been in charge of the office trying to keep things together. Concurrently, I had met my future wife, Deborah, who's with us today. And in 1985, together, we planted our first vineyard at Harlan Estate. And in 1986, the following year, we were married, and in '87, our son, Will, was born. '88, we founded, bonded the winery. In '89, our daughter, Amanda, was born. And it was in 1990 that we produced our first vintage that we would bring to the marketplace. In 2021, about 17 years after we started, Bob Levy recruited Corey Empting to begin to groom him to take on the responsibility for the second generation when that may come. It wasn't long after that that Don and Will recruited a fellow by the name of Francois Vignon, who Don would groom to become the director of Harlan Estate when Don was ready to retire. And it wasn't long after that that our son Will was beginning to be groomed to take on the responsibility of leadership for the family. Here we are almost 4 decades later. The same 5 people when we started: Bob Levy, Don Weaver, Lily Lee, my wife Deborah, and I are still working together. Corey Empting is now director of wine growing. Francois Vigneault is working very closely with Don to take on his responsibility. And I feel that Will Harlan, our son, is obviously still with us, and we feel very fortunate that he's going to be taking on or has taken on the leadership role for the family. Now that once we had our land and our people, we've been able to create an amazing culture. This culture is defined by this idea of the art of man and nature, and it's been built with a purpose and delight to enrich and inspire our patrons through this medium and mystery of wine. As we believe wine as art, we also know that there are as many definitions of art as there are artists. But as I reflect back over the years, the definition that stands out and has resonated most for me is from Picasso, which is, art washes away from the soul the dust of everyday life. Now at this time, I'm proud to introduce the new leader of our family wine growing domain, our son, Bill Harlan.
It's wonderful to be here today and to be reunited with so many friends, partners, and fellow producers from around the world for the first time in a very long time. Before I begin, I'd like to touch briefly on the wine in front of you. This is our 2017 vintage of Harlan Estate. We're very proud of the wine that we were able to produce, given the challenges of this growing season. Working only with fruit that was brought in before the wildfires began in autumn of that year, our production was therefore very small. This was an emotion-filled vintage, and in particular, I feel that our 2017 is really a testament to the character of this place, but also our wine-growing team's connection to the land. I will refrain from describing the wine in detail, but will allow it the space to speak for itself. Following from my father's points just now, I am certainly grateful for the opportunity to lead the family wine-growing domain going forward and feel excited for the future. I feel fortunate to be building upon a very strong foundation, and I share the vision that this is just the beginning of our journey. I've been aware of our 200-year plan since I was very young, and again, I'm going to act like we didn't just follow a 600-year plan, so just keep that in mind. But this was still a difficult concept for me to wrap my head around as a 5-year-old. Since joining the family business and recently taking on the leadership of the business, I've now come to understand that it's a rolling 200 years. And I understand that part of my role, beyond ensuring that we are on track for the vision today, is to make sure that we keep our minds focused on this long-term horizon. We recognize, after all, that it takes generations to truly understand a piece of land, and my generation within the family and wine-growing team has benefited greatly from the wisdom, experience, and perspective of our founding generation, who started from raw hillside land with inaugural plantings of vineyards, essentially a blank slate. Continuity in this respect is critical. Our wine-growing team has been able to evolve alongside our vineyards because of this continuity and longevity of our team members. As a result, within our first 35 years, our understanding of the latent character of Harlan Estate has gained significant focus and resolution, a trajectory that continues today. As Harlan Estate is situated on east-facing slopes within the western hills of Oakville and surrounded by forest, we spend much of our time thinking about what we call the critical zone, or the environment that exists from the bedrock to the treetops, the primary source for the character of Harlan Estate. Part of this, of course, is thinking about our viticultural practices, but the other part is really thinking about our connection to nature and to the surrounding woodlands that surround our vineyard blocks. Making sure that we are caring for our forests, providing a healthy environment for the vines, and more blurring the lines between the two. This has led us to examine more closely our beliefs about our relationship to nature and to the feeling that our human role can be one of positive impact rather than merely mitigating our own harm. recognizing that we are ultimately a part of nature and not something that exists outside of it. People have asked what future growth looks like for our family wine-growing domain. For us, our philosophy towards growth is really not about size, but about depth. And I see in my tenure as being responsible for deepening our connection to this place and elevating our translation of its character into the wine. Furthermore, we continue to remain grateful and deeply committed to our patrons and partners around the world, and I look forward, over the course of my lifetime, to supporting these relationships which allow us to do what we do. Thank you.